And you've just heard Champagne on a School Night by the Gaffer, taken from the album of the same name, which is out now. And I'm delighted to be joined by the Gaffer right now. Hello, Sam.
Hello, Ali. Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. So the first question really is, who is the Gaffer?
I mean, the easy answer would be it's me. I am the gaffer, but
Yeah. Well, where did the name come from? Because it's an interesting one.
so my last name is McGaff, and I kind of thought it's not a very, I don't want to say stage name because that almost makes me sound a bit more, glamorous and professional than I actually am, but thought it felt a bit more appropriate to go. It's a very bad pun on my last name, but was pointed out to me when you think of like the gaffer, it tends to mean manager, somebody who's in charge. And since the gaffer is kind of my musical output by myself, I mean, I've played with other bands, I still do stuff with other bands here and there, not as often as I'd like to. It means that it's purely my output. So I thought the gaffer, me in charge. I also helped for a while because my full-time job is a teacher, and you're bound to get plenty of people searching your name. So to have a pseudonym was definitely quite helpful in the circumstances.
Yeah, that I might guess that must be a problem in modern day education. But I think it's a great name, and absolutely, you're in charge of this music that we're going to talk about. Just as a quite aside, when I was young in the early 80s, there was a TV show called The Gaffer. Are you aware of that?
I am based on whenever I do the whole, searching myself up for results. That is always the first results.
Yeah, I think it was very much a comedy of its time. So let's talk about the album, and tell us about it. And it's your debut album, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
So tell us about it and the songs that are on it.
So it is almost, culmination of where I am now as a musician. I mean, I've been playing on and off, writing my own stuff since I was 14. I'm 28 now, so it's kind of 14 years of, writing. Started off, I'll admit, atrociously, but as you do, you're learning your craft. I've just been working to this point where I knew I needed an album. That I would regret it if I didn't have an album. So kind of taking it upon myself last 3 or so years, I thought I want to put something out there that I could look back on for the rest of my life and be happy with. For me, as a music fan, albums have always been the way I consume music. I'm very, well, I've always found it very romantic, the whole, package of an album, whether that is CDs like I collected as a boy, vinyls as an adult. I like the idea of having a package there in front of you, being able to absorb it, feel like you own it. And then if you put it on for it to, flow, something you can enjoy from start to finish and really get behind. And I thought, I kind of want to get in on that action. I think I've got the songs now that I could produce a consistent album, one that would be listened to from start to finish, one that, I will look back on and think, yeah, I gave that everything I've got. So it was very much me knowing I wanted to release an album, then how do I make it the best thing I possibly can? So I had the songs written in the past couple of years, but I did historically, if I've ever made music, I've been so kind of happy with the music I've made. I've chucked out there as soon as I can
Right.
enthusiastically because I wanted the world to hear me, whereas I really had to kind of stop myself this time. So wrote these songs. There's about 14, whittled it down to 10. Um, but just was being as critical as I possibly could of the songs, thinking, how can I make this better and better? So about a year off listening to the songs, taking wee notes of, nah, actually, this could be better, or oh, here's a wee hook I could add in there that could make this more interesting to listen to. So it was a long process, but I think it needed to be so I could be a bit more of a critic because I'm guilty of sometimes listening to something I write and thinking, yeah, that's amazing. I love it, but that tends to be because I've written it myself and I've grown attachment to it. So, seeking feedback from other people was quite important. Uh, Kind of changed my mindset to be open to criticism was a big thing because I knew if I wanted it to be the best it could possibly be, I needed to, take as much on board as I possibly could. And I do now feel I have a package that is the best it could be. I'll admit I'm a relatively limited musician, but I think with the tools available to me, I've made what I think is a pretty good album.
And I think you should be rightly proud of it. It's so interesting. One of my questions I've got here is, for me, it's a proper album, 10 tracks, 5 each side if you're thinking of vinyl. And I was going to ask if that was deliberate, but it clearly was. You had that in.
So with that whole kind of me being an album enjoyer, and I did think, I want to get this pressed to vinyl. I know I'm going to take a big hit getting it pressed vinyl. I've had it pressed to vinyl. I'm still waiting on the copies now, but I'll have it in time for the album's release. But the sequencing of the album had to be so that both sides would fit on. I thought, well, I grew up listening to the Beach Boys, the Beatles, Isaac Hayes, and all that, and their albums are sequenced to fit the package. And I thought, I'm going to get myself into that mindset. And as long as it flows well, which I think it does, it should feel like an album. From almost a selfish point of view, as somebody who's probably going to listen to this more than anyone else. But yeah,
that's a nice thing. And I will say before we move on, for those watching on the video version, kudos for you for having an Isaac Hayes album behind you. It's that I immediately spotted that before we started talking. And we'll talk about influences later as well. But you mentioned that it's your debut, and is the temptation to try and get everything on there? It sounds like you have almost taken the time and effort to avoid that and make sure that everything fits.
There was, I think when I was initially planning an album 5 or so years ago, which I then cancelled because I realised I couldn't really do it with the time restrictions and everything, it was that whole, okay, I'll get as many songs out there as possible, some, good, and maybe some that would end up being filler. But I did have the track listing down to 10. I think past few years, I knew it had to be 10 songs. I don't know why that is, but I think when I listen to albums, if I see 10 tracks, a decent length, I'm more likely to consume it.
Yeah.
So there could have been 14 songs, but there was 1 or 2 that I've been working on for years, and I just couldn't get them the way I want them to be. So it was the hard decision to, ditch them and replace them for something that fits the album a bit more. And it was actually meant to be, a summer album through and through. That was the goal, because over the past few years, I've been really obsessed with the Beach Boys and that whole kind of summer feel. And I thought, I want to make a summer album, but actually playing to my own strengths as a songwriter, I couldn't make an outright summer album that's just happiness from start to finish. That wouldn't have suited the kind of story of the album. So I had to ditch some of the ones that felt a bit colder and replace them with better songs, in my opinion. But yeah, keeping it to 10, but making sure it was the best songs they could possibly be.
It's interesting to reflect on how vinyl as a format, I mean, obviously when music was nearly all on vinyl, it kind of, you were really, I'm not going to say constricted, but it kind of made you, whatever it was, 45 minutes each side or whatever.
Yeah.
And then certainly latterly with CDs, it seemed to me everyone was kind of almost putting as much as they could. There was like 21, 22 songs, and some of it was clearly filler. You were just the idea of sitting listening. And I do think that's nice that if one of the things about vinyl making a kind of resurgence is that seems to be almost the perfect length, maybe by accident or by, just the nostalgia almost. That's the way that we kind of albums work, is that length of time.
Yeah. And I don't know if it points to, my attention span as a music listener, but I mean, some of my favorite albums are hours long, and if I had a long drive, I would listen to them. But if I'm, going out on a walk or a short bus journey, that kind of, 30 to 40-minute mark is ideal for me, because I'm interested the whole time. I don't have an opportunity to lose that interest. So that's kind of what I was going for with this album.
And let's talk a little bit about influences. You've mentioned the Beach Boys there, and there's I think some classic pop references. You might go back to the kind of songwriting of Paul Simon and Garfunkel, things like that. But also records I was listening to in the 90s and the 2000s, I'm thinking of Matthew Sweet, Sugar, Brendan Benson, that kind of American, how would you describe them? Not quite power pop, but pop music with a bit of a kind of melody through it as well.
Yeah, I think that would be accurate to describe as something that has that influence. And I think as a teenager, when I was learning how to play guitar, it was, the heavy alternative rock bands, Smashing Pumpkins, Weezer, some more, mid 2000s indie bands. But then as I feel I matured as kind of a music fan, and that was meant to sound completely unpretentious, but I ended up sounding like that. I did get this attachment to, something I did feel a bit more mellow and, well written with lyrics as a focus. So I think when it's come to me writing music, it's that, it's been hard for me to escape, that kind of interest in teenage angst and heavy guitars, while also kind of falling in love with that kind of 60s pop where melody is the priority. So I like to call it a wee kind of mashup of both.
That we're going to hear August of Wind after we've stopped talking. I think that track in particular has that mid 2000s melody, but also real pop feel to it as well.
Yeah.
So was it difficult to then, I'm always interested in how people decide what song goes where on an album. Now, with yours, I think we've mentioned you've taken your time to make sure it's as you want it to be. And the opening track for me couldn't be anything other than the opening track.
Yeah.
It just sounds like that, absolutely.
The moment I wrote Delusionland, I thought this has to be the opening track. I think I had it written and I couldn't imagine it anywhere else on the album. It just wouldn't have fit. So it wasn't written to be the opener, but you couldn't put it anywhere else. I also quite like the songs that had to be in the album, so it had to be number one there in the track listing.
And after that, did it become more difficult? Was it just a feel type of thing?
Yeah, it was quite challenging. Months just revising, and I had, notes on my phone with the song lengths, rejigging it here and there, thinking, oh, where's this going to go? Just making sure it flowed as an album. And I've always had this idea in my head that an album should start, big oomph of an opener.
Yeah.
Then kind of mellow out a bit before kind of coming back in and almost have, an emotional climax to each side. So that was important for me, is that both sides of the LP ended on quite an emotional climax. And yeah, just making sure it flowed, that, I didn't think too much about, BPM and key, but then when I sequenced the album, I thought, actually, if I have a slow song here and a very similar tempo, the listener might not be as interested. Actually, you need to kind of mix up every so often to make sure, you are feeling that attachment to the album. You're not going to lose interest. Well, yeah, just so that it flows. So there was so many different track listings, but then when I got, told about the time restrictions for each side of the record, that played a big part, because the original track listing wouldn't have actually fit on two sides. So I rejigged it here, but end up listening to the new version of that. I thought, yeah, this does make sense as almost a narrative as well flowing through the album. So all worked out well in the end.
And how did you know then? You say these songs have been with you for a while. You avoided the temptation to just get them out there to the world. How do you then decide, right, that's it, I am happy? Is it difficult? Is it like, I'm thinking of when I speak to writers and they go, yeah, I knew the book was finished because I just was sick of it. Not quite sick of it, but, I had nothing more to add to it, put it that way.
Yeah. It was very difficult, because there's always that temptation to, change it all.
Yeah.
But what I did was, when I met Dominic, who is the engineer who mixed and mastered the album, the first thing we kind of agreed on was the deadline, which was, I think, 9th of December. And at the time, that was about 5 or 6 months away, and it seemed so far away. But then, as I recorded the album and it felt closer and closer, and I thought, oh, maybe I've not been so proactive with bits here and there. You had to finish it.
Mm.
But I mean, I think for me, having had about a year or so of the revision process for the album, when my notes of all what could be improved on was done, that's when I thought, okay, I think I've not noticed anything obvious that needs to be replaced. It tends to be a lot of time I would listen to, songs I like, and a wee bit here would stand out to me like, oh, suddenly all of the instruments have cut out and it's just a voice. And I would take wee notes of that and thought, where could that fit on the album? Almost like if I was a music fan, what would I be looking for in this album? So yeah, it was tough to say it was done, but I'm glad there was a deadline because that really did help me, draw a line under it and say, yeah, this is the final product.
And there's lots of different instruments on the album. Are you playing them all?
I am, apart from some keyboards, which my friend and former bandmate Ewan is playing keyboard on 3 tracks because I'm not a very good piano player. I can play very basic chords here and there, but it would be very simplistic, whereas he's quite an accomplished keyboard player. So I added that wee bit extra flavor. So that's to Bloods, Pantomime Villain Phase, and Sunrise. He lends a couple of vocals on the album, more kind of backing vocals. And then my friend Liam played a wee bit of lead guitar on a closing track, Sunrise. So I'll say it's 95% me, but the rest is some friends.
Well, that brings me to the question about playing these songs live. Have you done them at all, and are there plans to do them?
So played 3 or 4 of them live, I think, previously. I've not done a huge amount of live Gaffer gigs. I've not done as much as I nearly would have liked to, just based on personal circumstance and life getting in the way of it. But there's an album launch on the 3rd of May at Banshee Labyrinth in Edinburgh. Going to play a decent chunk of the album. So it actually feels like an album launch. So the past few weeks, I've been getting together with Ewan and Liam, who I mentioned, but some other people to try and bring the songs life because ultimately it was me who recorded the whole album apart from little bits. It's then how do you bring a group of 5 people together and
Yeah.
perform those songs live? So we're getting to the point where I'm quite happy with how we sound and it should be a good show. And yeah, I want to play as many gigs as possible, but I guess my musical circle has kind of narrowed a fair bit in the last few years. So opportunities haven't been as many, but I'm always open to playing a wee bit more if the opportunity comes up.
That's good to hear because I'd love to hear these songs live. I think it's a tremendous album. We should let people know you've said it's going to be out on vinyl, where they can get it. In fact, where's the best place for you that they could get it?
I would say I'm going to make sure it's on my Bandcamp, which I'll make sure it's on all kind of my socials and everything. I wanted to get the vinyl. I know this interview is going out after the album's released, but I wanted to get the album in person. So when I say, okay, you can buy an album, I actually have a copy of it to hold up and show everyone because, colored vinyl and everything. I'm quite excited about that. So
Yeah.
I'll make it available online. If people know me in person, they can always contact me personally, and that saves any, postage or anything. Gonna get in touch with a few kind of local record shops and see if they're happy to stock any, but I don't have any names yet, and it's record store day tomorrow, so I don't really want to pester them right now.
Yes,
Um,
that's true. As we record this, it is Record Store Day tomorrow. Yeah, it's always a bit mad. But that's great. And is that, I guess, one of the considerations must be when you make an album is how it's going to get out there.
yeah.
It's so many options.
Yeah, and for me, I know I've made the best album I possibly can, or I really hope I've made the best album I possibly can. And now it's just a matter of getting as many different people to hear it because it's fair enough me making it for myself, but I am that proud of this album that I don't want the audience to just be me and, a few of my friends and family, as appreciative as I am of them. I want anyone who I know who might enjoy that kind of sound to be able to listen to and enjoy it. So the goal for me now is how can I get as many different people to hear it as possible? I don't know how that is exactly. I've got loose ideas in my head, but I just want the world to consume it if they want to.
Well, I mean, if people have enjoyed the 2 tracks, well, the one we're going to hear and the one we heard earlier, then they will really enjoy the album. There's lots of different styles on there, but I think there's it's not uniform. You can tell it's you, I think, through the whole thing. Obviously, you've got your voice, but I think as well, they're kind of songs which almost feed into each other, and that might be down to the track listing as well. You know, do you feel, is it too much to say you're kind of telling a story through the album? Is it?
No, not at all. And that was the goal. Is I feel like this album was almost like a checkpoint in my life. I think, past few years, I've got married, a house with my wife, and I feel I've reached milestones. I feel this album tells the story of my life before then, before I reach this is where I'm at. So I'd say it documents, I want to say, my adolescence, the story of me to a certain point, but I had so many, different feelings and emotions to do with these songs as I do now, as somebody who's a bit more relaxed and enjoying himself in general. So the album does almost tell that story of what did it take to get to now, a couple of years ago, I'll say. So that is kind of the story. While it's not, an opera of any kind, there is a narrative thread just with how do I get to where I want to be. So that was kind of the idea.
And you said at the beginning, or near the beginning of this interview, that you wanted to make something that to be proud of, and if, I think I'm not putting words in your mouth, if you didn't make anything else, you had this and you'd be absolutely proud of that. But we always want to hear more. Are there plans to do future things, or is that far too early to think about that?
There's no immediate plans. I want to, take stock after all this is done, relax, enjoy what I've created a bit more, because my mind's been absolutely whirring for, I'll say, the past 12 months or so, from getting recordings done to this kind of release cycle. But music is, my main love in life. So I will write songs.
Yeah.
And maybe not an album, because it's taken absolutely everything out of me to record this album. But I'm guessing maybe more singles, potential EP. There's nothing planned. So I don't have a timeline or anything, but I know I will write music. Maybe something that's slightly different to what I've been writing in the past, because this is very much an exploration of my, alternative rock and pop side of me. It's almost, what other routes could I go down? So I'd say watch this space, but there's no immediate plans just yet.
So there could be the big rock opera in the future. Who knows? Sam, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I really hope this album gets heard far and wide, because these songs really deserve it, I think.
Thank you very much.
And this is The Gaffer and August of Wind.